Okay, guys, so let's take a look at the path that blood actually takes through the heart. Now, the first thing I want to point out to you about this diagram is I've got a few things standing in here. Obviously, I've got some lungs up at the top, I've got a heart, and then I've got the feet. And the feet are there to represent all of the parts of the body, all of the different somatic cells. So not really just the feet, but the muscle cells and the nerve cells and your brain cells and your cells in your fingertips and your cells everywhere. But those are just representing the body cells. The other thing I want to point out to you is that these things are not true to life right now. We know that in reality, these lungs compared to the heart would be much bigger, and we also know that the heart would live right up about right here. You know that from looking at your pigs, that that's where the heart would be. But in order to make this easier to understand, we're going to keep the heart down here. But keep in mind that because the heart is here, that makes these distances a lot shorter. They're just going to look bigger in the way that I draw them here. Okay, so clearly I resized a couple things and moved them around a little bit just to make this a little bit easier. I love this diagram of a heart. It's actually a model, a 3D model, but the one thing I don't like is that it doesn't show the very first blood vessels I'm going to talk about. Now remember that circulation is a cycle, so you can start anywhere when you're looking at the path of blood. I just like to start in the right atrium. So blood is going to come in through the cranial vena cava and the caudal vena cava. But either way, blood is going to start up here in the right atrium. I'm using blue because blue means deoxygenated blood, usually. That's just sort of the way that people have decided to describe this. So blue is deoxygenated blood. So our deoxygenated blood, blood that has no oxygen but has lots of waste in it, is going to come into the right atrium. From there, that blood, so the right atrium is going to squeeze, and that blood is going to go through a valve down into the right ventricle. And from the right ventricle, then that right ventricle is going to squeeze. And when that right ventricle squeezes, now look at how meaty this is. Look at how much there is there. That right ventricle is going to squeeze so hard, and it's going to push the blood up this vessel. And that's the pulmonary arch. And the pulmonary arch, see how it's an arch shape? Isn't that handy? And it's pulmonary, and pulmonary refers to lungs. The pulmonary arch is going to lead to the pulmonary arteries, which are going to lead blood to the lungs. So the pulmonary arteries are going to take blood to the lungs. And so that blood will come into the lungs. So remember, arteries away. So the pulmonary arteries go away from the heart, and they're pulmonary because they go to the lungs. So the pulmonary arteries take blood to the lungs. Well, the lungs now are going to exchange that oxygen at the alveoli. Remember that you had those close little alveoli with the blood vessels, the tiny little capillaries lying on top of them. And that blood is going to get exchanged, or the oxygen is going to get exchanged. And so now the carbon dioxide gets dropped off and oxygen gets picked up. And so now coming out of the lungs are going to be the pulmonary veins. And so the pulmonary veins are going to bring blood back into the heart. And the pulmonary veins will bring the blood into the heart. It's now oxygenated blood. So our red blood is going to be oxygenated. This is some awesome inking that I have happening here. Our red blood is our oxygenated blood, and we're going to bring that blood in at the left atrium. Remember, the atria are the welcoming places. Welcome, blood, come on in. The left atrium brings that oxygenated blood in. We go past another valve down to the left ventricle. The left ventricle is going to give a really hard squeeze. Again, look at that nice meaty muscle there. A really hard squeeze, and we're going to push the blood out of this big old mamma jamma of an artery called the aorta. And the aorta is going to have some blood coming out each of these guys, but the aorta also, if you take a look, notice it's coming down this way. The aorta will also come back down behind the heart, and that's what we call the descending aorta. The descending aorta goes down through the abdominal cavity, down out to the other parts of the body. So whether we're going out this way, or whether we're coming down the descending aorta and then going out into other arteries, that oxygenated blood is going to the body cells, maybe going to the brain cells coming up this way, or maybe going down to the cells in your toes coming down this way. That blood then is going to drop off oxygen and pick up carbon dioxide. So now we're back to deoxygenated blood. And guess what happens now? Our deoxygenated blood is going to come in through our vena cavas, the cranial vena cava coming from the head direction, the caudal vena cava coming from the foot direction or the butt direction. So we've got our blood coming in and going out in all of these different ways. So let's run through that one more time. I'm going to erase all of these lines and we'll see if you guys can follow along. So I'll do it pretty quickly and see if you can predict where I'm going to go when I go. Boy, it's a good thing I have a lot of things to say because this erasing is not quite happening as quickly as I like. Of course, if I knew how to use this app better, it probably would go a lot quicker. But, you know, you live and you learn. I'm experimenting. What do you want from me? All right, so let's start with blood in the same place, the right atrium. Remember that blood is going to come in the cranial vena cava. It's also going to come in the caudal vena cava. Remember that in humans, these are the superior and inferior vena cava. Blood's going to come into the right atrium, go through a valve, and go to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, blood is going to go up through the pulmonary arch and out the pulmonary arteries. When blood goes out the pulmonary arteries, it goes to the lungs. At that point, it picks up oxygen and drops off carbon dioxide, comes back in to the heart through the pulmonary veins, comes into the left atrium, goes down to the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, goes up through the aorta. Some of the blood goes out here through these different arteries. Some of it comes down the descending aorta, goes out to the somatic body cells, exchanges, drops off oxygen, picks up carbon dioxide, becomes deoxygenated blood, where it comes back in to the heart through the cranial and caudal vena cava or the superior and inferior vena cava. Now, you should be able to do this process. It's not about understanding this diagram that I'm showing you right here because this diagram is a steaming hot mess. What's important is that you are able to do the process. Because if I ask you where blood goes when it leaves the left atrium, you should know the answer to that. If I ask you where blood goes when it leaves the pulmonary veins, you should know the answer to that. If I ask you what kind of blood, oxygenated or deoxygenated, is in the descending aorta, you should know the answer to that. But if you can do this path, then you will be able to figure out the answers to all of this. So work on that. Good luck.